We're going to hear from Dr. Eva Rieger. She's a German musicologist, but she will also introduce herself in her talk. So welcome, Eva. Delighted to have you here with us, and over to you.
My name is Eva Rieger. I was just a couple of words to myself, as this is the first time I'm speaking here. I was born on the Isle of Man in 1940 during the war, and I'm often asked, good heavens, why the Isle of Man of all places? My father, Julius Rieger, was a German pastor who got a job in 1930 in London as a pastor of the German congregation there. And when Britain declared, he went there in 1930 because unemployment was quite spread in Germany. But when Britain declared war with the Nazis, Prime Minister Churchill had to get rid of all German citizens living in the UK, and he said the famous sentence, "Collar the lot." My parents were sent to the Isle of Man, and the men moved into camps, and my mother was pregnant with me, and together with 3 siblings, she was put into a hotel, and I was born there in a luxury prison, so to say. We moved to Berlin in 1953, so I have both passports. I studied musicology, and in 1976, I visited the first conference with women students at the Free University of Berlin, which they had hosted on their own. They said that the men should look after the children, and it was a woman-only achievement. It was called Frauen und Wissenschaft, and they did a book on it. I'll show it to you, the top, Frauen und Wissenschaft, Women and Academia. And here you see some of the women who were listening. It was absolutely full, and I was very enthusiastic. These women were now in the 70s, as I am now in the 80s. And we were stunned to hear on this conference in 1976 what so many women had achieved in the past as authors, as musicians, and so on. And I asked well, not as musicians, they weren't mentioned at all, because I asked myself, how is the situation for women in music? I only knew at the time that the composer Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn, had a sister, and that she had perhaps written something. So I went to the archive, and I said to the man who was looking after it, to the boss, I said, "Have you got any music by Fanny Mendelssohn?" And he said, "Oh yes, an American was there yesterday. It's still on the chair." And there was a pile of papers, of yellow papers, on the chair. He let me touch them without gloves. He wasn't bothered at all. And I leafed through them, and I saw a string quartet, an overture, over 100 songs, piano pieces. I was absolutely amazed. And later on, I found a book on Clara Schumann, the wife of Robert Schumann, the composer, and saw that she had composed quite a bit, but did not dare to show it to others or to have it at all performed. And so this was, of course, the initiative for me to work immediately on a book. And the first one was called Frau, Musik und Männerherrschaft, Women, Music and Male Domination in 1980. So I can be proud to have been the first person who attempted to attack the subject. The 3rd edition was printed in 2021. Anyway, I followed with Frauenmusik. This is a collection of all sorts of essays and letters from women of the 19th century who had tried to compose or had tried to work as musicians and had always been in trouble or had not managed it. And that followed a year later. And so I was really in the subject now, and I realized it was something ever so expensive. What I really enjoyed writing, perhaps I can just add that, and then I don't want to show off so much. What I really enjoyed writing was a book on the films of Alfred Hitchcock, where I analyzed the music of the way music described women and the way music described men. That was this one here. And the nicest thing about this book was that I could always tell my colleagues I'm working on academia, and at the same time I was looking at the TV. and had a lot of fun with that book. So now, Eva Rieger, stop showing off and get on with it. So I'm going to get on with it now, and I would like to summarize what happened to me last December in Cologne. Oh dear, I've still got 2 English books. Just show you that. I just see that. That's one, and the other one in English was one on Richard Wagner's wife, Minna Wagner. So that enough of that. I would like now to summarize what happened to me last September in Cologne, as a few weeks ago, at the annual meeting of the Society for Research in Musicology, and how absurd the shouting was when I gave my presentation, as large parts of the audience, consisting of 60 to 70 people, quite a lot of them still students, probably believed, or what I think had been told, that I was transphobic, which of course I am not. I don't have to mention that. I had decided to talk about the problems which ensue, especially for women, when ideas of dissolving the gender roles pop up. This is a very, the question of non-binary, being not non-binary or changing sex is very popular nowadays. I was careful to quote from others, first of all of them well-known women professors in German universities. After having read the first few pages of my presentation, a woman stood up and shouted, "Stop! Hören Sie auf!" It's horrible. Shut up, practically. Just standing up in the middle of an academic talk. I was absolutely shocked, but I said, listen, you can ask your questions when I finish. It's only 4 pages, and I'm on the second one. So she sat down again. At the end, it got loud, and the moderator stopped the discussion at a very early stage. I felt I could not defend my opinion. I was open to all arguments. I was waiting for them to come with their arguments and would have liked to discuss things with them for longer. I therefore combine this report with a request to each and every one of you listening to me today to fight for freedom of discussion at your university or wherever you are, and not to accept that you are silenced, in this case through protests, as that is now happening with the cancel culture at home and abroad. I just recall what the author J.K. Rowling, Kathleen Stock, and many others had to go through when they campaigned for women's rights on this issue. Anyway, one day before my presentation, I had been told that I had been proposed to become an honorary member of the Society for Research in Musicology, and that after approval by its advisory board, I would be honored with a laudation at the general meeting. I was, of course, very surprised and happy at this. I am certainly not one of the best intellectually. I want to make that clear. There are others which are much better. I was probably chosen because I was the first to point out the situation of women in musicology and in social reality. In my thanks for this honor, I would have openly pointed out that I was just the first stone to fall into the water, but the waves were picked up by many women who had already devoted themselves to the topic, Beatrix Borchardt, Susanne Rode-Breimann, and others, and so the honor also belonged to them. But things turned out differently. After the outcry at my presentation, I realized that a public award could be embarrassing for the society when I walked to the stage, because there would certainly be boos and noise from some in the audience. I did not want to put the society through that. It was embarrassing. So I sent my presentation as a mail to the president of the institution and offered to resign, which she accepted, surely with relief. She probably did not have the nerve to go through with the award and to stand up for freedom of discussion if protests ensue. Perhaps she discussed this with her board and they decided to turn me down. I don't know. I do not need an award, but it would have been a signal to the mostly male colleagues who have, many of them, disparaged sex and gender research for decades. With this honor, one could show them how important it had been to discuss the subject of women and music. Many colleagues, male colleagues, had ignored women's and gender studies for years and continued to analyze the Middle Ages, the work of male composers, etc., etc. No comment, just silence. On the other hand, over the years, women have repeatedly told me that the book Women, Music and Male Dominance had changed their way of thinking. This opportunity has now been missed to the detriment of everyone who participates in gender research in music. I can add that I am used to this sort of behavior, as I experienced the same kind of situation 50 years ago. This has nothing to do with music, but I just want to add it. Having just been employed as a research assistant at the Berlin Academy of Music, this is 50 years ago, I took part in a TV documentary which, for the first time in television, was about the problems of lesbian women. A group of us were asked to talk about the subject, a sensation at the time. The evening before the film was broadcast, we women who had taken part in the film were, of course, pretty much scared. And we held hands and swore to help one another if anything awful happened. Some university employees who then saw it on television recognized me and were outraged that I had taken part. My father, a pastor, said, "Homosexuality is an illness." And the director, I said, "I don't feel ill." And he said, "There are illnesses which one don't feel." So how could I give an argument to that? And the director of the Berlin Philharmonic Choir, where I was a member, said that if there were any complaints, I would have to leave the choir, which happily did not happen. But the day after the film was broadcast, my professor, Dr. Gerhard Kirchner, shook my hand and congratulated me. A gesture of sincerity that I will never forget, because I was naturally afraid of contempt and criticism. I am just telling you this old experience because I find it vital to hold together when someone is attacked. I did not so much need comfort, but I needed solidarity. Back to the present. My approach is that together with many feminists, there is a biological difference between men and women, not in order to make biology a social destiny, but to emphasize that biology does not determine anything social. It is naive to believe that gender inequality will disappear if the sexes are dissolved. The danger is that the dissolution would destroy many rights for women which they had fought for. There has been a biological binary since the creation of humanity, which is organized hierarchically in patriarchy. You know all this, I'm just trying to get back to the subject. The concept of sex must be separated from that of gender. I have been trying for 46 years to show the inequality in the field of music so that it ends, but it is still present everywhere. One example. Music that was used to describe traditionally female and male characteristics and has been established in the theory of emotions since the 18th century is still used in film music. Men are described upwards, with trumpets and so on, and the women used to get, it has changed now quite a bit, but in all the old-fashioned films, you'll find them with da 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 dee da da, all the feelings and emotions go into the women, and all the activity and the primal role goes to the men. It's most annoying, but you have to make it clear with students and with pupils so that they learn from it. It has by no means been abolished, but continues to influence us unconsciously. I named quite a lot of examples in my book on the music to Hitchcock's films. And I think there will never be a total freedom of gender roles. In short, woman as the female gender is a structural category in the patriarchy that is ideologically linked to the nature of women as biologically female beings, meaning sex. The definition and appropriation of what they think womanhood is distorts what it means to be really a woman and to be oppressed or murdered, femicides, because of this single fact. Trans people are not discriminated because of their gender, but because of their gender identity. For women, it is exactly the opposite. I would like to give a short summary of what I talked about when giving my paper. I began with quoting a colleague who claims that the binary gender order is a disorder as it serves primarily as an instrument of power. I disagree, and quoted 4 other colleagues, all German women professors. One of them is Tove Zeuland, who claims that the theory of sexual difference is superior to the gender approach because in the latter case, this would not lead to a more egalitarian gender relationship. On the contrary, men would remain dominant. I next quoted Hilge Landwehr, professor at the Free University of Berlin, who writes, "Experience is necessarily physical." This is a quotation. "There is currently no way for us to get rid of gender because the term is a crucial part of the abstraction basis of our culture. It will not disappear by simply ignoring it because it is fundamental to many other categories of social order. And finally, as we know, it is closely linked to the juxtaposition of matter and spirit, as well as to all the well-known dual concepts that build on it." And she closes with the following: "Perhaps in the distant future, we will be able to do without the term gender, but what we will certainly never get rid of is the physical affective concern." For Cornelia Klinger, a professor in Tübingen, individual gender identity is not just a social construction, but much more. She emphasizes that social reality is structured and shaped by gender difference, and that the category of gender is a conditional structural feature of modern society. She praises the cultural term, which opened the way for feminist theory to move from society to culture, and thus to the broad fields of thought, knowledge, meaning, and representation systems. Women should get involved, whether it is film analysis, religious criticism, or anything else. Women should get involved and change the culture so that they can participate on an equal footing. Marvelous, I can just applaud that. That is the task. For her, catching up is the main subject at the moment. The feminist philosopher Luz Irigaray, she's not a professor here, but a very, very well-known philosopher, also shows that the accusation of essentialism or biologism on the subject of sexual difference is untenable. It has become increasingly clear that Butler's deconstruction theory cannot break the long tradition of the male-connotated subject position, and that the dissolution of gender roles would destroy many rights for women which they have fought for. So this was the paper. I was talking about these quotations, and I added something of my own. This was my paper which caused such a row and robbed me of my status of being honored. And then something else happened, because besides this, my female musicologist colleagues who are members of the Musicological Society have an internet list where one can write messages called Music and Gender, Mugi Gender, where we can exchange our opinions. I am also a member, of course, but when I started to discuss the theme of gender identification, they suddenly decided to censor the messages coming in, and mine were no longer sent. It became clear that they were censoring my contributions, meaning that they simply choose not to pass on to the group anything which I criticize and which they don't like. I wrote to the presidents of the Society for Music and Research and asked her to discuss this and tell the women to return to free speech, but I never received a reply. I cannot send anything anymore which includes the trans subject. Fancy free speech being forbidden at a university. I have no chance to explain my opinion anymore, which I find very sad and really awful. Back to my colleague who thinks that the dissolution of women gender norms can improve the secondary state of women in society. Of course, that is ridiculous, because the secondary state of women will not disappear. Why should it? Because people suddenly claim that they are non-binary? The traces of sex cannot be obliterated, and their behavior will not change if they suddenly play such a role. I'm willing to talk to people who are convinced of such ideas, yet I am closed down like many others who dared to open their mouth. So I'm nearly finished now. You've been here, you've heard quite enough, but I just want to finish it off. Many have been upset about identity politics, which is now politically fashionable and in vogue. But there is a simple solution to the problem that could pacify both opponents and supporters. I made up the following together with Alice Schwarzer. She's a very well-known feminist who has her own magazine called Emma, and we agreed on this. I will read it out to you. The mistake people are making today is that they want to dissolve the sexes biologically. But what we need to abolish is what we think of female or male today, not the genders. Men must learn to be more sensitive, to listen, not to see themselves as the primary gender, and thus exercise power. Women need to learn to become more self-confident, to assert themselves, and not constantly subordinate themselves to male domination. This is how things could work out. So we have to abolish what we think of as female or male, the gender roles, and not the biological genders. These are and remain unchangeable. That's the quotation. I can close with a positive ending to my talk by telling you two facts. First, I am working on a book with a title, From Women's Studies to Gender Dissolution, 50 Years of Gender Studies in Music, 1976 to 2026. So I have to finish it by next July, which makes me very busy. In the last chapter, I will show the disadvantages of trying to stamp out biological sex for women and underline that the only way of changing the disadvantages that women still experience is by talking to young people through education, information, pointing to all facts of biology, shedding light on important facts, telling them to ask questions, and discussing everything with them. In that, I agree with Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, who talk about the subject in their excellent book, Cynical Theories. I am all for the sexes to move towards one another, of course, but we must make clear that there is no point in pretending one is a member of the opposite sex. Secondly, my deceased partner, Marianne, left money behind meant for the promotion of women's rights, and I would suggest you host a conference in London to which I can contribute some money. No huge sums, but money. Women who think that non-binary ideas are positive should also be invited so that a thorough discussion can be made possible. We don't just want to praise ourselves. We want to speak to the women who are convinced of the other position and try to get into a discussion. We need a new commitment to freedom of speech shared by all in a secular, liberal democracy. I have now finished my paper. Don't forget, fight for free speech and don't let yourself be intimidated. And thank you for listening.